All right. So, kind of steering into this, like one of the things I've been contemplating is just like through this process of me reading this, and then really as a result of that, being in another cycle of practicing this, it's really it's really becoming a reminder of just how potent this is. And it reminds me of when I was producing the book, when I was writing the book, when I was working with my editor, is that every person that came into contact with it while working on it had some kind of like unexpected experience with it that was really uniquely their own, you know, very, very interestingly customized to kind of who they were, that they would bring forward. And so, I remember my editor, for example, my editor had said, and by the way, we're gonna read Perfectionism today. So good. There's that. I remember my editor who is really I don't know if, like, you could call her, like, hard-nosed isn't totally off the mark, but a real professional, um, who is, like who part of my, um selection of her and my intrigue of her was that her background was not from any type of, like, spiritual new age, that I was really trying to move away from that and turn this to really focus on this being grounded, because the source, what I call, like, the inspiration, the source is, like, a wonderful book that I've read many times, The Eastern Body, Western Mind. But there's a lot about in it that is kind of like using the kind of terms like energy and, it's leaning into stuff that I don't know. I don't know. It's leaning into something that I feel like really exists in a particularly like insular plane of that's like is more towards play than it is for real transformation. And what I mean by that is transformation is hard. And to be able to do the work of transformation, it's it is kind of like I think the notion of revisiting kind of these playful places in ourselves is, you know, notionally, directionally, like, like correct for lack of a better word. But the thing is like with the building, I think the thing with like building emotional capacity and capacity for feeling and self-acceptance and the ability to stand in your own power and trust, and to build trust in a way that is not externalized, that isn't like looking for trust as like, do I have a stockpile of money? And do I have these like ideas of what make me safe that are like super conditional, you know? I mean, money can't keep you safe. I hate, it's like it does things for you. I'm certainly not going to, but it does like provide safety, but it doesn't guarantee it. That's really well put, by the way. Write that down. Um, yeah. But so back to this thing, my editor had been like a Condé Nast, like the, magazine powerhouse. There's like Vogue and Architecture Digest and all the popular magazines of the day. Had been an editor there, had also been an editor at the Village Voice, was I think one of her first jobs. And, she was a little too like good. Like I guess it's really political there. But I'll let that's her story. I won't tell it. And also does like Princeton, very detailed, complex international relations, academic editing. So she came to the table kind of with a notion of like, okay, this is interesting notionally, but I'm not really here to like play in these waters. And I actually had taken that really at face value, and I still felt like I was kind of like in my own process alone in this. And I remember the first conversation we had where she was like, "Ooh, this is evocative." And that's continued to be a theme, even with people who are reading it, who are, um, academic, like business folks that, you read one chapter, and I think for a lot of people, it's like that's it. There's not much like that can hold you for a while, that like I think this is like a kind of long process that I am going to be in with bringing and representing this work and bringing it into the world, and I'm refining and learning a bit more about who I am as it relates to it and how to maintain my own process, my own practice without it being like, "This is what this is." And, like, one example would be, I've had some actually, I'll tell this, that I've recently had this issue of like wanting to lean more into my authenticity and to speak more freely and express myself more freely, but I've felt actually like so a lot of the like release for me at a certain level has happened, but now I feel this responsibility for TPM where I'm like, I don't want to misrepresent it in my process. Like, and as I just said, everyone who had in the producing of it had these different experiences with it. It was like this, I guess the sense I've had is that I don't want to interfere or with people's process of finding this by representing it as being like it's this, which is, seeing what I go through. So I've held back a lot on that. So even some kind of notional things of like separating my social media, as kind of like silly as that sounds, is like really beginning to get more draw a line about what this is versus what I am, because they're separate. But so that was the thing with my editor. My editor had, toward, yeah, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I do, and that's also something I'm really mindful of. So I've been trying to figure out how to share, um, to build community and connection with people without sharing people's processes, which I think are very intimate and personal. So yeah, so by the end of the I remember the first time I was like, "Oh, you're in here too. You're going through this. Like, you can't really interface with this without it having some type of impact." Well, like, and I'm having it right now. Um, then my, designer, very different, and I don't wanna share any personal experiences, but what people like wound up touching in on and pulling out like being like, wow, this is really like this has created a shift for me. Um yeah, and then my proofreader, who was like kind of a proofreader to the stars, had while she was proofreading it, she was like she had it she would see, it's like this is all personal stuff about people, but for her the experience of it had like changed her relationship. And I think that's one of the things that a couple things, like, one of them is how I do think that when it's really important that this is about the inside out. It's about changing our relationship within ourselves and having these experiences from the inside out. So trying to make sense of other people, with this as a context, is to make sense of ourselves. And interestingly enough, when we make that sense, when that happens, then who we are in the world presents differently. Once again, the tangle or the hairball. And our perception of other people changes because we're actually shifting the tint of the lens of what we see in other people, and that's been something that's been really, like, nice to hear. I don't know, I have any other word for it. It's nice to hear is people telling me that their relationships change. That's a really common one, and sometimes it's bad. So, or some like bad in the sense of like it creates tension because, and I think there's even an example in the book where folks have shifts in their presentation, their known priorities, their expression of integrity, and that creates tension in the relationship that can either be reconciled or it can't be. And that's very fourth hub. Like, it's really worth mentioning while we're reading in the fourth hub is that this is it's another thing where, like, I sort of, like, entertainment-wise consume, like, new age content, like yoga stuff a little bit, like meditation, self-help, all that kind of stuff. I'm always kinda, like, watching it with grave interest. Word. Like, chosen. And I think one of the things is that it's like this idea that, the thing is like everything's like all good. The deal is that your problem is you're just like not seeing that everything's actually really great. And that's like one layer, but that's closer to beginner's taste. Like the fact that it's like, hey, everything's actually great is much it's like such a bad pitch for this because of just because of, like, the thing is, like, the breakthroughs come through some painful revelations and some even painful physical shifts. Like, what I'm doing right now in my practice is I actually, epigenetics, whatever, I feel like I'm shifting something that's genetic because it's, like, really physically hurting. Again, it's like this is the stuff it's like, who would ever buy anything that I'm describing? It's, like, really ridiculous. To be like, "Hey, it's, like, really great. It's, like, really great. You wanna just transform everything and just break through and realize that life is, like, just like that. Your problem is you're not seeing it the right way. The problem is you. Life is great. The problem is you." Um, which is, like, kinda tickle. I mean, because there is this freedom in it. There is this freedom in it, but it's like the kind of it's odd because it sort of doubles down to do this thing that's like the issue is that you're not thinking about it the right way. Your negative thoughts your negative thoughts. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting where it's always like, there's always like your negative thoughts, and there's no that I don't know if I've ever heard anyone like kind of say like, what could have possibly created those? What what could have possibly created the pattern to have negative thoughts? And this is another kind of like original sin thing where it's like this inherent, sort of baddiness where it's like, maybe that needs to be explored a little bit. I can't I just it's so like absurd. It's the laughter is like it's so absurd. Um, but yeah, I mean, so the thing that I'm going through is like it's like it like feels like burning. I don't want to talk too much about it, but it's turn back now. Um, but what's happening too, actually I do want to share this because I just want to put this out into the world, is that so I'm really going into this fourth hub right now, and it's creating I'm not gonna talk about my own experience too much, but I'm gonna talk about, like, something I think would be very helpful if somebody told me. Is that it's creating, like, a burning, and the sensations are really difficult, but there's this feeling I have in my integrity of wanting to sit by its side and hold its hand as it walks down the street. and, like, be patient with it. Ooh. Mm. Ooh, yeah. Mm. The hurt, like, it's a hurt, I think, it's like a hurt, it's a grief, it's a loneliness. And the grief is like a multifaceted grief. And so I feel like it is something that is like because so here's why I don't feel it. The thing is like so it's like the surging of really, like an uncomfortable state to exist in prolonged periods of time. And by the way, I did access this state by accident by being put in like extraordinarily like deep back bends when I was in Bali, and I remember, like, this feeling once again, like, surged, like, it broke open in the back bend, and I remember talking to my teachers and asking them, like, "What is this? Like, what's happening right now? I feel like my heart has been, like, broken, and the feeling of it is sustained, and it's going on for days." It's actually, like, really fucking awful, and because my teachers couldn't explain it to me. I think I was very eager to, like, stop it from happening. Yeah. Yeah, and now I have space, which is a luxury, you know, but it's like this thing of allowing it and not being afraid of it and not shutting it up and letting it hurt and letting that just kind of the rain cloud let itself rain. I mean, there have been times where I in the first round with this, I did, like, there was a lot of crying, hence why it's in the techniques and exercises. But back to the thing of this feeling like it's something that's, like, semi-inherited is that some of my behaviors are starting to resemble things that I saw my mother do, which would be so this is why I'm bringing this up, which would be very disturbing if I didn't have a deeper sense of context for what's happening. And have experienced this at a sort of level that a manageable level. And this is something I think, like, as far as, like, wanting immediate transformation, like, the desire for a quick fix is that, I think about people who, like, do like psychedelics and have breakthroughs where they're like, I can never see things the same anymore. And like they have these radical shifts that happen very dramatically. But I think one of the things with that is that you've got reflex emotion and logic. And I think when you can shift one and you're not working through like the physical manifestation of the reflex and like the emotional capacity and the ability to operate and to feel more alive and like lean into the experience, um, you know, yeah. I think that's kind of a thing. But yeah, so this thing right now of seeing these behaviors that, I don't really like, and that's another thing of like instead of being like, how do I get out of that? Where I look at it, and one of them is being pretty sedentary. And it's like where I'm like, I should, and just keeping on bringing it back to being like, well, am I uncomfortable right now? Do I not like this? Or is there this sense that I shouldn't be doing it? This is like, there's a bit about this in the first hub, chapter 4. And it's to say, like, no, this is actually okay right now. And sometimes it isn't. I'm like, okay, now we do something. But that thing about being able to go, "Okay, let's," like, the depth of actually being able to remain present, to hold my hand, to be with myself, allow to radically accept myself, to accept myself in forms where I'm like, it's like, it's like, "Oh, I should be," to, like, allowing ease. Yeah. Yeah, I think in this kind of stuff, I only wanna share the stuff that, like, right now, I'm like, I wish there was somebody that could tell me about this. And also I will say that one of the reasons I do feel confident and comfortable presenting this as, like, that as a piece of information and not as, like, evidence of, unraveling um, is, like, coming out of it now, the cycling out of it is is the expansion. So it's kinda like the, like, and it's and or, ebbs and flows, and it's kinda like the tide coming in and coming in, just where, like, the capacity is growing and that it's, and the freedom on the other side is like, "Wow." You know? But the thing is to want it all at once, I think, is, like, kind of a is almost like dropping a, like, form of devastation on something that's, like, too much too fast. So, the kind of gentleness of slowly untangling and just having even, like, small little openings and just the knowledge of the existence of the opening is the opening. Like, that's the opening, to be able to see through this. Yeah, that's the opening. Shit. Well, that's good too. Couple good ones. I'd say it's a tweet worthy, but I don't think it's a Twitter anymore. It's it's X worthy. No, it's not. It's not. It's something, there's gonna have to be a new, yeah, we need a new term for something. We need a new term for, like, a little bit like meme worthy maybe. That's also terrible. Okay, so I'm gonna read out of Perfectionism. And once again, we're in the interruptions and stressors for the second hub, fourth hub rather. And so what we're talking about in this, just as a kind of summary, is that we're in the fourth hub about, like, connection, belonging, love, balance, like this place in between the corporal reality and now where we go into being, like, more sort of in, like, you know, in their mind. It's really like where if you even look at the physicality of where this hub is it's, everything afterwards is like here and up. There's 3 more hubs in here, and we're kind of leave this is like the in between the corporal reality and then, like, where we get into this other stuff. But okay, so we're in the interruptions and stressors, and really specifically, like, what we're doing here as a reminder is we're learning what the hub contains in terms of its initial development, its basics, its themes. Then we get into understanding the interruptions and stressors, and what we're looking at are what are the types of conditions and circumstances that will shape our reflexing early on. And there's some exceptions. Some places in the books, there's stuff that, like livelihood is in the first hub, and I don't think there's a, infant on earth, but, like, how this stuff kind of ties in. So, I mean, once again, perfectionism, we're not achieving it when we're not trying to. But here we are. So perfectionism, and we're talking about factors that interfere and with, like, really, like, the development and the dynamic expression of the given hub. So, let's do this for perfectionism. And by the way, some of this stuff, it's interesting that some of this stuff starts to kinda, like, emerge, like, like, as a continued theme. You see this happen even with devotion and discipline in the 3rd to the 4th hub. And now we're starting to see some of these themes that kind of proliferate upward, if you will. Okay, you ready? You sure? Okay. So, perfection, a theme throughout the hubs, is the epitome of conditional acceptance. If we inflict perfectionism on ourselves by hiding our flaws and bad days, We hurt ourselves and the ones we love by not offering the opportunity to be fully loved for who we are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Parents who feel pressure to be flawless and so try to present themselves as perfect, positive ideals for their children imprint these same unrealistic expectations on them when they hide tears, emotions, or deny and act defensive about their own mistakes. And here we see an echo from the leaders versus managers section, which is really this idea that to be in a position of like a hierarchical position or a position of authority, that we need to have all the answers and be perfect. And because this isn't real, it's always going to be a problematic. There's just nobody who's like absolutely qualified to be in a position of authority over anyone else. There's nobody who's qualified to be the president. There's nobody who's qualified to be an executive. There's nobody who's fully qualified. Fully qualified. I mean, there are people that, it's like when we're talking about this difference of being able to consider the greater good for more people and think beyond yourself, that's the qualification. But there's nothing that is going to be able to extract ourselves from our humanity and the reality that like the world is constantly changing. So the information we need is constantly changing. We're constantly changing. Like in change, there's just no way to be, an expert. Even the idea of like an expert is like with a grain of salt of realizing like that's somebody who's sort of like in the domain, sort of stays alive in it, but that it's like they're constantly having to evolve as well, or they just become a crusty disaster. Enough of those. So anyhow, we'll continue. So perfectionism becomes poisonous when it causes hiding or any striving that has us believing that our happiness, true belonging, and wholeness exist in the future once we finally earn them. Mm, yeah. Again, for a child, having an adult who consistently shows up for you, pays attention without trying to change you, delights in who you are, and takes the time to see and appreciate you is essential for building self worth. A little kick in the ass can be a good thing, but too many kicks and we're demoralized. If the connection to our importance, our uniqueness, and our worthiness is not established early in life, it's challenging to love ourselves in adulthood. Mosiah, an interviewee in his early 30s, talked about evaluating his relationships. I realized that I discredited kindness. When people treated me like I was special, I didn't trust them. I would migrate towards and respond to critical and difficult bosses and discount kind feedback. I was attracted to judgmental friends and boyfriends. I rationalized that I was tough and that the right people for me should be able to handle it. But when he started feeling connection within himself, he said, I started looking at my relationships. I was unfamiliar with loving kindness, and the people who made me comfortable were the ones who were more like the critical family that turned away from me when they found me disagreeable. Simply becoming aware of this has caused a big change in me. Yeah, I like the thing. So this is like, it's interesting because I'm reading this. I'm like, oh, okay, that's sort of like I'm like, where does that belong here? That anecdote. And I think that the point being that, we have kind of a thing where it's like, it's probably like 80-20, where it's like 80% of the time, like there's a sense of like, sort of like it should be better, I should be better, whatever. And then 20% of the time being accepting, which should probably be the other way around. And that we begin to trust people who are like, "Let me tell you how to make this better all the time." Like, that is someone that is like, "Oh, that's how you do it. That's how you develop somebody." Instead of fostering, like, their own inner knowing, their own inner confidence, their own sense of, like, brilliance, yeah. In a way that's healthy, you know? Not in a way where it's like, I'm more special than people. It's like where that every individual has this kind of special thing. Yeah. And also one of the things I wanna bring this back to is the Parinama for Beginners class is in the 2nd session where we really connect to what the core needs are about being delighted in, being cherished, being made to feel safe and protected, as, 3 of them, and that a lot of the work in this is reconnecting back to those things as being like hungers and giving them to ourselves in whatever form we can, asking for it in the people in our lives, um, respecting those needs, and respecting when we need to give ourselves pacifiers to satisfy them. So when self-worth and positive self-regard are unfamiliar, people who have it can be disturbing to be around, offending to our sensibilities. If receiving is difficult because we don't feel worthy, we may defend ourselves against generosity. The devotion within love involves surrender, softening, and allowing, and perfectionism is the antithesis of this. Devotional discipline is the replacement for punishing perfectionism. You're remarkable right now exactly as you are. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's really, like, I feel it, yeah. I mean, I think, like, probably better put than this, it really is that it's like this nuance between the difference between mm, yeah. It's the difference between this perfectionism of working towards a future state of being rich enough, smart enough, fit enough, well dressed enough, I don't know, whatever, like, whatever the things are people want, like all the stuff, fill in the blank. Good enough parent in the future, you know? The difference between this, like, in terms of this perfectionism versus devotion is in the moment of showing up in the best possible version of ourselves in the moment, and that gritty imperfectionism of that, it's like the love of that, the beauty of it, the extraordinariness of being in a moment, showing up for yourself. Let's just talk about for yourself. Full circle, going through this process of transforming and shifting and expanding these hubs, is that the devotion is to not try to make it something it's not, and to be able to sit with it and accept it. And really, I guess, like, love to me almost feels like too trite a term because it's more profound than that. It's like the depth of, like, acceptance and adoration for all facets of ourselves. So, yeah. Well, so the next one is parents who don't know how to love, and that one's great. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like this chapter, it's like it's actually, I'm having a process in it. It's been pretty strong. Um, but I can actually see, I think the thing that I can see is I can see that, my own development wrote like, the level of my development where it was wrote this, and that as I continue to evolve, I can see that. But whatever, it's fine. We're not going for perfect. I showed up. I showed up. This is where I was. Some point maybe it gets a second edition or whatever. But anyway, okay. Sending you lots of love. Thank you. And I'll see you soon. Bye for now.